Let's talk about how an IPP might be a useful planning strategy in the potential sale of a small to medium-sized business. Let me talk about Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Mr. Smith's 57, Mrs. Smith is 55. They've had a successful business for a number of years. The business has been valued around $6 million, and they had an offer from another entrepreneur that wanted to buy the business. So after they consummated the transaction, they stood back and decided how could they best shelter themselves in the capital gains, set up a retirement income, and also plan for their future, particularly for their children. Mr. and Mrs. Smith set up a personal holding company. And in the context of that, they also established an individual pension plan, better known as an IPP. They agreed to sell their business for $6 million. Firstly, they each get a $500,000 capital gains exemption. So that reduced the $6 million to $5 million. They then set up a personal holding company, of which the $5 million was deposited into. Now, they then decided to set up an IPP, or individual pension plan, for $2 million. And they also decided to set up a retirement compensation agreement for the balance of $3 million. So let's address the IPP first and how the $2 million is broken down to its various components. First of all, they get a past service contribution back to 1991 for the personal holding company. So that consumed about $450,000. Under the Pension Act, and because of their early retirement ages, 55 and 57 to 65, they get a CPP early contribution. That was approximately $180,000. Also under the Act, they're eligible for advanced pension contribution. That took up another $650,000. And finally, again under the Act, there's a 100% inflation indexer, so at 4% of CPI. So that also gave them an additional $450,000. So if you add up the numbers, roughly it came to $2 million. I mentioned earlier the retirement compensation agreement. So they allocated $3 million to the RCA. And the RCA is a trust. But unlike normal trusts that expire in 21 years and have to be paid out, the RCA is an eternal trust, and therefore the money is in there forever. And why did they do that? Well, the Smiths have a number of children, and they also have a cottage. And this was the way to ensure that that $3 million would be available at some point in time when the cottage had to transition from the Smiths to their children. They wanted to make sure that the family had the money. Similarly, under the RCA, they set up a health spending account. And a health spending account will allow them to have, in their case, about $80,000 to use when required to pay for needed medical expenses. So you can see through the story of Mr. and Mrs. Smith, by implementing an IPP and an RCA through their personal holding company, they were able to shelter capital gains, set up a retirement income for life, establish $3 million for the beneficiaries for the eventual purchase of the company, and finally set up a health spending account for future medical needs. I think that type of planning strategy is very compelling for small to medium-sized business owners when contemplating the sale of their business.